So Abram built an altar there to the Lord Israel, are rooted in the shared culture of Canaan, although it had unique attributes that differed in the shared culture of Canaan. Still found expression. It had shared practices and language. Some traditional practices could not be merged with Yahwism, but others, like the sacred poetry, the music, and the architecture of the Canaanites, were adopted and became integral to the Israelite religion. The Old Testament's embrace or rejection of these elements means that the Canaanite religious influences still affect us today through biblical narratives. The things that the Bible are condemning in the Old Testament are, in fact, the culture that the Israelites at the time of writing the Bible are trying to distance themselves from in their own past. Things like human sacrifice, idolatry, and the worship of more than one God. These are the things that they themselves practice just like everyone else in the world. And these are the things that they will polemicize in the text to divorce themselves from their past. Before the findings at Ugarit Ras Shamra in 1928, our knowledge of Canaanite religion was minimal and largely from indirect sources. The Old Testament did mention Canaanite deities and rituals, but these were often in a negative light, making interpretations challenging. Mentions of Canaanite gods and rituals were also found in Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and Phoenician writings, including the Kara Tepe inscriptions from 1946. However, these weren't enough to form a complete understanding. Greek historians provided accounts of Canaanite beliefs, but it was hard to distinguish authentic traditions from later additions. Excavations at places like Byblos and Megiddo give us glimpses, but only a fragmentary picture. Thanks to the discoveries at Ras Shamra, ancient Ugarit in North Syria, the Canaanites tell us their own story. Hundreds of clay tablets found here, written in a dialect close to the biblical Hebrew, and offers rich insights. These tablets feature extensive mythological poems, records related to the temple services, lists of deities and sacrifices, and details about temple workers and rituals. Additionally, artifacts linked to gods like Baal and Dagon, including temple remains and stelae, have been discovered. It's crucial to understand, though, that while there was a core Canaanite religious belief, local variations existed. I mean, they didn't have the internet and email, and the mail system wasn't very great. So every city you went to had their own ideas. Not every Canaanite city would have worshipped all the same gods that we know from these texts. There were variations at play. Canaanite religion was more of a public affair than a personal one. Its rituals, mostly centered on ensuring fertility, were community events, though there were individual acts of devotion as seen in the Phoenician inscriptions. The religion was mainly a communal way to connect with nature's forces. This involved practices believed to ensure continued creation and rejuvenation. The prominence of some deities in mythological writings doesn't always reflect their actual popularity among Canaanite devotees. Conversely, some gods like Dagon had a minimal role in myths, merely acknowledged as Baal's father, but seemed quite revered, as evidenced by a dedicated temple and 2 stelae in Ugarit. El, the Hebrew word for God, is the supreme God and creator, and shows up as Allah in Arabic. Variations in the name El are found in many Semitic languages: Ugaritic, Phoenician, Hebrew, Aramaic, Akkadian. In northwestern Semitic cultures, El was a term for any deity, and also specifically for the primary god. He often stood at the top of many divine hierarchies and played roles like the god of creation or the father of gods in certain Canaanite and Ugaritic sources. Yet, using the name El can be confusing because sometimes it refers to the main god and at other times to different gods. For instance, in Ugaritic texts, the phrase El Melech means El the king, while El Hadad refers to the god Hadad. In Ugaritic, the plural for gods aligns with the Hebrew term that sometimes means the singular god, Elohim, for example. Some believe that various authors changed stories from polytheistic context into monotheistic ones. I myself subscribe to this idea, and I will show this in this video. And this causes many inconsistencies in the text. But once you see it, everything starts to make sense. Names with the stem Il appear in many Semitic regions among the Amorites and Sabaean people in the southern Levant. Several ancient texts and inscriptions mention El or connect him with other deities from different cultures, indicating his widespread recognition and influence. For instance, the Egyptian god Ptah shared an epithet with El, and an ancient script described El as the god of eternity. The Egyptian deity Ptah was labeled Lord of Gath in a prism from Tel Lachish, and on the other side, it bears the name of Amenhotep II, pharaoh from 1435 to 1420 BCE, Bronze Age. This title also appears in Serabit text 353. Ptah is frequently referred to as Lord or the Eternal One. This association between El and Ptah that brought about the consistent use of Olam, meaning eternal, for El. Although, in Ugaritic records, Ptah seems to be more closely related to the artisan deity Kothar Wakasis. An additional link is observed with the Mandean angel Ptah-El, blending the names Ptah and El together. Herodotus, the famous Greek historian, who wrote in the 5th century BCE, who never mentions anything about Israel, Jerusalem, or Yahweh, or anything like King David or Moses, does have some interesting things to say about the god Ptah, who he calls by his Greek equivalent, Hephaestus.
After the reign of the priest of Hephaestus Ptah, the Egyptians were made free, but they could never live without a king, so they divided Egypt into 12 districts and set up 12 kings. These kings intermarried and agreed to be close friends, no one deposing another or seeking to possess more than another. The reason for this agreement, which they scrupulously kept, was this: no sooner were they established in their districts than an oracle was given them that whichever of them poured a libation from a bronze vessel in the temple of Hephaestus Ptah, whereas in all the temples they used to assemble, would be king of all Egypt.
Now, what I found interesting about this text is the division between the 12 tribes, if you will, of the ruling class of Egypt at this time. And it makes you wonder, could this be some of the source material used for the creation of the 12 tribes in the story in Genesis? The 12 districts itself wouldn't be too convincing, but when you take a look at El or Yahweh being a god of metallurgy and craftsmanship, and the uncreated one, like Ptah, there might be some connection here. Ptah is an Egyptian deity responsible for creating the world, manifesting it through potent force of spoken words. A hymn from Egypt's 22nd dynasty praises Ptah for shaping the world with the vision of his heart. Meanwhile, the Shabaka stone, originating from the 25th dynasty, mentions Ptah bestowed life upon all deities and their spirits, using his heart in his voice. The creation by the voice, something we see in the God of the Old Testament. His worship then moved beyond the borders of Egypt, all the way into Syria, and was exported throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. Through dissemination by the Phoenicians, we find figures of Ptah in Carthage. His epithets: Ptah, begetter of the first beginning; Ptah, Lord of truth; Ptah, Lord of eternity; one who listens to prayers; master of ceremonies; master of justice; the God who made himself to be God; the double B, the beautiful face. Now, some of you watching this right now may be familiar with the Heliopolitan Aeneid and the creation myths that say that Amun or Atum is the self-created craftsman who created the other gods. And though this is certainly true, the priesthood in Memphis and Crocodipolis and the Elephantines have competing mythologies that make Ptah the self-created demiurge who creates the other gods and humans. An Elephantine, Khnum, who, like Ptah, is also depicted as a craftsman or demiurge with the potter's wheel behind him, just as Ptah has images of himself with the potter's wheel behind him, as he creates gods and humans alike. Porphyry once said,
At the city of Elephantine, there is an image worshipped, which in other respects is fashioned in the likeness of a man and sitting. It is of a blue color and has a man's head and a diadem bearing the horns of a goat. He sits with a vessel of clay beside him, on which he is molding the figure of a man. And from having the face of a ram and the horns of a goat, he indicates the conjunction of the sun and moon, Ra and Yah, in the sign of the ram, Amun, while the color of blue indicates that the moon in that conjunction brings rain, Tefnut. He goes on to say, in the mysteries of Eleusis, the Hierophant is dressed up to represent the demiurge, and the torchbearer, the sun; the priest at the altar, the moon; and the sacred herald, Hermes. Moreover, a man is admitted by the Egyptians among their objects of worship, for there is a village in Egypt called Anubis, in which a man is worshipped, and sacrifice offered to him, and the victims burned upon his altars, and after a little while he would eat the things that had been prepared for him as for a man. They did not, however, believe the animals to be gods, but regarded them as likenesses and symbols of gods. And this is shown by the fact that in many places, oxen dedicated to the gods are sacrificed at their monthly festivals and in their religious services, for they consecrated oxen to the sun and moon.
What I find the most striking about this passage is his comparison to the Eleusinian priests of Bacchus and Demeter. Now Khnum, who Pharaoh Khufu was named after, the famed builder of the Great Pyramid, Giza, almost seems like a perfect synchronization between the competing creator gods, Amun, Ra, and Ptah. Ptah is one of the three major gods of the Memphis triad, along with Sekhmet, and he's also the father of Nefertem. And Khnum has an almost identical role within the Elephantine triad. The Temple of Elephantine was dedicated to Khnum, his consort Satis, and their daughter Anuket. Elephantine is the city where dozens of Jewish Aramaic texts were found that not only physically predate every fragment or manuscript of Hebrew Bible in existence. I repeat, the Elephantine city, where we found older Jewish Aramaic fragments than any existing fragment or manuscript of the Hebrew Bible in existence. But also, it shows that the Jews at Elephantine in the 4th and 5th century BCE were still polytheistic during this time. Following the 587 BCE destruction of Jerusalem, some Judean refugees traveled south in what may be called an exodus in reverse, settled at Elephantine. They maintained their own temple, the house of Yahweh, or Yahu in this case, in which sacrifices were offered, evincing polytheistic beliefs, functioning alongside that of Khnum. Gods like Osiris and Isis are all over the place in these texts. The temple was destroyed in 410 BCE at the instigation of the priests of Khnum. So what happened? Was Yahweh in direct competition with Khnum over who was the true divine craftsman? Possibly. One of the most common attributes among these metallurgy craftsman gods like Hephaestus of the Greeks, Ptah of the Egyptians, and Vulcan of the Romans is their connection to volcanoes and mountains due to the richness of metal ores found at these places. It is very possible that Yahweh is no exception, although he's from an entirely different location. In Exodus, the presence of fire and smoke is paired with the mountains quaking. These tremblings, akin to small earthquakes, are typical of volcanic eruptions, leading to the expulsion of warm gases from the cracks. This expulsion is accompanied by a significant sound, referred to in the Sinai theophany as powerful shofar sound.
And you came near and stood at the foot of the mountain, while the mountain burned with fire to the heart of heaven, wrapped in darkness, cloud, and fog. Then Yahweh spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but saw no form. There was only a voice.
Yahweh's revelation is always at a mountain, whether called Sinai or Horeb, the event pictured like a volcanic eruption. As these texts show, volcanism seems to be an essential attribute typically associated with Yahweh, linking him to the craftsman metallurgy gods, as I mentioned before. The account of the Sinai revelation, with its volcanic imagery, is meant to show that Yahweh himself is not just his divine emissary, but a demiurgic craftsman.
The mountains melted Nazlu to Yahweh, Sinai before Yahweh, the God of Israel.
Some believe Mount Sinai might be one of these Arabian volcanoes, which the Israelites approached in the text when departing Egypt. Jacob Dunn even theorized that Yahweh was once an Arabian volcanic deity. This ties into the theory that Yahweh's worship in Israel has Midianite roots. This theory draws from biblical references that depicts Moses' introduction to Yahweh in Midian, near the mountain of God, close to Jethro's residence in Exodus 3, 1-6. Here, Moses is instructed by God to bring the Israelites after their Egyptian exodus, Exodus 3:12. Intriguingly, Moses' father-in-law is portrayed as a Midianite priest, suggesting Moses might have adopted local religious beliefs from him. In other passages, Moses' father-in-law is identified as a Kenite. Some Kenites settled in Israelite lands and maintained a close alliance with them. The biblical figure Cain, considered the Kenites' founding ancestor, is significant in early biblical narratives, highlighting this group's ancient proximity to Yahweh. Cain's role as the initial person offered to Yahweh in Genesis 4:3 reinforces this notion, while Yahweh's association but the Midianites might explain Israelites using volcanic imagery to depict the divine presence. Linking Yahweh to the Kenites prompts a reevaluation, especially considering the Kenites' metallurgical pursuits. The Kenites seem to have been skilled metalworkers. Genesis 4 discusses Cain's descendant, Tubal-Cain, as a craftsman skilled in molding copper and iron. Semitic cognates of Cain hint that metallurgical activities were integral to its meaning. Hence, Cain might originally have been represented, the pioneering figure in metallurgy, with the Kenites, both metalworkers and smelters, as his successors. Their association with the volcanic deity, like Yahweh, becomes clear in this context. Historically, deities linked to metallurgy were also connected with volcanoes. For instance, Hephaestus was linked to Mount Etna in ancient Greece, and the term volcano originates from the Roman god of metallurgy, Vulcan. The connection between volcanoes and metal smelting is straightforward. Both release similar odors and plumes of smoke. In past times, smelting was the sole human activity involved in melting stones. Lava pouring from volcano mirrors slag from a furnace, which once solidified resembles volcanic rock. This similarity is evident in Exodus's description of the Sinai revelation, comparing the ascending smoke to that of a furnace. Exodus 19:18. The persistent use of volcanic imagery when describing Yahweh implies a deep-rooted metallurgical aspect to his earlier identity. Notably, the Song of Deborah associates Yahweh near Araba's copper mines. This volcanic aspect of divine revelation is also highlighted in Deuteronomy's account of the Horeb revelation. It notes that Yahweh communicated from amidst fire and smoke, essentially from the volcano's core, while it erupted.
Oh, Yahweh, you came forth from Seir, advanced from the country of Edom. The earth trembled, the heavens dripped, yea, the clouds dripped water. The mountains quaked or flowed before Yahweh, the one of Sinai before Yahweh, God of Israel.
The writings in Zechariah support this idea. The book starts by sternly rebuking the earlier prophets of Israel, accusing them of abandoning the paths of Yahweh and ignoring his call. Zechariah 1:4-6. This assertion is further elaborated when the text predicts the arrival of 4 rescuers dispatched by Yahweh, referenced as smiths in Zechariah 2:3-4. Smiths, in subsequent revelation, Zechariah 6:1-5. Zechariah witnesses 4 soaring chariots, representing the 4 winds, originating from the Bronze Mountains. This terminology alludes to the copper mining regions like Araba and Sinai, hinting at Yahweh's earlier residence. Thus, even in Zechariah's time, there were those who recalled Yahweh's association with metallurgy. Recognizing Yahweh's historical role as the deity overseeing metallurgy in the southern Levant sheds light on various aspects of his biblical character. In fact, Yahweh is nowhere to be found in any of the Ugaritic or northern Canaanite texts or inscriptions, which are dominated by El and Baal, as well as different craftsman god, Kothar Wakasis, who I mentioned earlier, who is identified with Ptah in texts that survive from Memphis, as well as Enki of the Babylonians. So Yahweh is most likely local to the southern Levant, near the Sinai Desert and Midian. In Isaiah 31:9, the oracle of Yahweh, whose fire is in Zion, and his furnace in Jerusalem. Imagery of metallurgy undeniable here, surrounding Yahweh. This could also help explain the biblical author's attempts to polemicize Baal as an evil opposition to Yahweh, considering how popular Baal was to northern Israel and being the prince and son of El. He only has to be opposed by Yahweh. While many view this portrayal as merely a symbolic expression without deeper theological meaning, considering the other metallic attributes associated with Yahweh, it probably reveals a metallurgical facet to Yahweh's worship in Jerusalem. In this perspective, the numerous metal artifacts in the Jerusalem temple aren't just symbols of grandeur. Their context largely detailed in Exodus via the depiction of the tabernacle. It specifies about the metals used, hint at deeper theological importance they held. They symbolize the heavenly furnace within the Israelite sanctuary, turning it into the earthly abode of the Israelite deity. Moreover, the copper-clad altar in the temple's grounds lends a metallurgical undertone to the sacrifices. The glow from this copper surface, when heated to nearly 1000 Celsius for the burning sacrifices, is reminiscent of the luminance of liquefied copper or gold. The beginning of the prophet Ezekiel's vision recounts his entrance into the heavenly realm as follows.
And I looked, and behold, a stormy wind came out of the north, a great cloud, with a fire flashing up, and brightness around it, and in its midst, something like Hasmal, out of the midst of the fire.
The vision illustrates Hashmal, an entity radiating powerful luminance amid celestial flames. This unique term is exclusively found in Ezekiel's revelation within the Bible. However, comparable words appear in both Egyptian and Akkadian, Hashman and Hashmalu, referring to an amber or yellowish orange metal or metallic mixture. The Septuagint translates it as electron, signifying either amber or electrum, a natural blend of gold and silver. While many translations peg Hashmal as amber, this interpretation doesn't quite fit, given the reference to the glowing embers within the flame in Ezekiel 1:13. It's more likely that Hashmal alludes to something shining brilliantly due to high heat, considering that burning amber emits smoke but not light. It stands to reason that Ezekiel 1, Hashmal is more likely a representation of liquefied metal.
When they moved, I could hear the sound of their wings like the sound of mighty waters, like the sound of Shaddai, a tumult like the din of an army.
In Ezekiel's depiction of these beings and their movement, it seems he's detailing the powerful gusts that fuel the celestial furnace, enhancing the creation of shining embers. Essentially, this vision portrays Yahweh's divine realm as a massive kiln encircled by winged entities that drive the air, current akin to bellows. Taking into account both Ezekiel's imagery and Isaiah's analogy, it becomes clear that these prophetic insights symbolize Yahweh's manifestation in both the celestial and terrestrial realms through the imagery of a colossal furnace. This emphasizes the strong ties of his worship to the world of metallurgy. The oldest plausible occurrence of his name is in the Egyptian land of Sashu Yahweh, an inscription from the time of Amenhotep III, 1390 to 1352 BC. The Shasu being nomads from Midian. Yes, Midian, there we go again. And Edom in northern Arabia. This gives the Yahweh as a Midian god way more plausibility. When we look at the Greek sources like Herodotus and Plutarch, for which gods are worshipped in this region, they both claim that it's Dionysus and Venus that are the main gods worshipped here. One might immediately dismiss this due to the blatant differences between Greek Dionysus and Yahweh. However, the Bronze Age Dionysian religion was so widespread and his worship flourished from Turkey down to Egypt along the Mediterranean. So if Yahweh was connected to this ancient god in any way, he would almost barely resemble him anymore by the time of antiquity. It's possible that Yahweh could be a metallurgy volcano god with Dionysian attributes. For example, figures like Tacitus, John the Lydian, Varro, draw parallels between Yahweh and Bacchus Dionysus. Often Jews employed symbols commonly linked to Dionysus, including kylixes, amphorae, ivy leaves, and grape clusters. Plutarch highlighted these resemblances to argue that the Jews venerated a version of Bacchus Dionysus. In Plutarch's Questions in Moralia, he points out that Jews praise their deity using the exclamations Iwa, Sabao, chants that are typically related to Dionysus.
Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that the plowman shall overtake the reaper, and the treader of grapes, him that soweth seed. And the mountain shall drop sweet wine, and then all the hills shall melt. And I will turn the captivity of my people Israel, and they shall build the waste cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink the wine thereof. They shall also make gardens and eat the fruit of them. And I will plant them upon their land. They shall no more be plucked up out of their land which I have given them, saith the Lord thy God.
This is just many of the hundreds of Dionysian imagery that is found throughout the Hebrew Bible, including the fact that the temple was designed with golden vines and golden grape clusters throughout the sanctuary designed by Solomon, with golden satyrs, who are the race of daemons that are led by Dionysus to battle. In the ancient Greek text, many biblical parallels and allegories are associated with the vine. The children of Israel are referred to as a vine in Isaiah 5:7, and in Hosea 9:10, Isaiah likens God to the owner of a vineyard, and Israel is the vineyard. The grapevine is one of the 7 species with which the land of Israel was blessed. Deuteronomy 8:8, an ample supply of wine symbolized prosperity and well-being. An overflowing vat symbolized divine blessing. Every man under his vine and under his fig tree symbolizes the idealized past and hope for a future peace. Threats of national disaster were couched in terms of laying waste to the nation's vines and fig trees. Hosea 2:14, Joel 1:7. The vines in blossom symbolize the passing of winter. Song of Songs 2:13, and the ripening of fruit represented a fulfilled state of being. Joel 2:22. Although the fruit of the vine was eaten fresh or dry, the plant was primarily valued for its fermented juice, which was considered an appropriate gift of royalty. The description of Israelite culture is provided by Isaiah in his parable concerning a vineyard. Let me sing for my beloved, a song of my beloved about his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a fruitful hill. He broke the ground, cleared the stones, and planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower inside it. He hewed a winepress in it. Isaiah 5:1-2. Many ancient depictions of Dionysus are shown as a man riding a donkey. According to multiple sources, one of them which includes Menasius of Rhodes, who claims that Antiochus IV raided the Temple of Jerusalem, found within the Holy of Holies a golden donkey with a man riding on it. According to Tacitus, when Pompey the Great raided the Temple of Jerusalem, all he found within the Holy of Holies was a golden ivy diadem a symbol of none other than Dionysus Bacchus. A coin was released by Pompey to commemorate his triumph over Judea, which displayed a bearded individual on his knees, holding a branch with the caption Bacchus Judaeus. This can be translated as either the Jewish Bacchus or Bacchus from Judea. Some interpret this figure as representing Yahweh as a regional version of Bacchus or Dionysus. However, considering such coin designs usually showcase subjugated individuals rather than the deities of the conquered, others believe it might symbolize a Judean whose name was Bacchus. This figure is sometimes thought to be the Hasmonean king Aristobulus II, whom Pompey defeated. Regardless, one of the many titles of Dionysus was Yao, or Iacchus, and the Phrygians in the east called him Sabatsios, a god who was later identified by Romans as Theos Hypsistos, which means God Most High. The initial Jewish settlers in Rome faced expulsion in 139 BCE. Cornelius Hispalis, acting under a law that forbade spreading the corruption of worship of Jupiter Sabatsios, banished the Chaldean astrologers and the Jews.
Gnaeus Cornelius Hispalis, praetor Peregrinus in the year of the consulate of Marcus Populus Laenas and Lucius Calpurnius, ordered the astrologers by an edict to leave Rome and Italy within 10 days, since by a fallacious interpretation of the stars they perturbed fickle and silly minds, thereby making profit out of their lies. The same praetor compelled the Jews who attempted to infect the Roman custom with the cult of Jupiter Sabazius to return to their homes.
This action suggests that Romans possibly equated the Jewish Yahweh Tsabaoth, meaning Lord of Hosts, with Jove Sabatsios. Plutarch posited that the Jews revered Dionysus and celebrated the Sabbath as a tribute to Sabatsios. Additionally, he explored the idea of equating the Jewish god with the Egyptian entity Typhon, although he later dismissed this association. Meanwhile, the monotheistic Hypsisterians revered the Most High using a name that might have been linked to the Jewish deity Herodotus, who, like I said, never mentions Israel or Jerusalem or Yahweh, does happen to describe a local religion somewhere between Mount Sinai and Phoenicia, possibly Midianite territory, who have a similar ritual as described in the Hebrew Bible, such as the priests wearing similar white and blue robes with golden tassels that are seen among priests of Dionysus and Demeter at Eleusis, and the blood oath rites, which seem to look very similar to Leviticus blood oath rites.
He is to dip his finger into the blood and sprinkle some of it 7 times before the Lord, in front of the curtain of the sanctuary.
Now compare this to the rite that Herodotus records among these local Arabians.
There are no men who respect pledges more than the Arabians. This is how they give them. A man stands between 2 pledging parties, and with a sharp stone cuts the palms of their hands, near the thumb. Then he takes a piece of wood from the oak of each, and smears with their blood 7 stones that lie between them, meanwhile calling on Dionysus and the heavenly Aphrodite.
In both cases, the blood is sprinkled or smeared exactly 7 times to seal the oath. A painting on a jar found at Kuntilat Ashur under the inscription Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah, dated to 800 BCE, possibly the male and female pair that Herodotus thought was Dionysus and Aphrodite. In an inscription discovered in Ein Gedi and dated around 700 BCE, Yahweh appears described as the Lord of the nations, while in other contemporary texts discovered in Kir Bet Laya near Lachish, he is mentioned as the ruler of Jerusalem, and probably also of Judah, Yahweh, in the form of Yahweh, is frequently invoked in Greco-Roman magical texts dating from the 2nd century BCE to the 5th century of the Common Era, most notably in the Greek magical papyri under the names Yahweh, Adonai, Sabaoth, and Eloi. These are also used as Bacchic chants among Dionysian religious revelers at this time. Use of Yahweh becomes blurred by the usage. Since the 2nd century BCE, Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans had identified the evil god Seth Typhon, often depicted as a donkey-like creature, with the Jewish god Yahweh. The Seth Yahweh tradition, with all its negative valence, was then applied to the creator, worshipped by the Christians as well. Evidence for this view comes from the early Christian depiction of the creator and his sons in donkey or Typhonian form. The oldest manuscripts of the Greek Septuagint, Old Testament in Greek, before the church editions came in the 4th century, show Yahweh in them for Leviticus 3:27 and 4:27. These are replaced with the uniform Kyrios, or Lord, in the 4th century church codexes of the Sinaiticus, Alexandricus, and Vaticanus. I think it is very possible that we have in Yahweh a warrior, demiurgic craftsman with ancient Bronze Age Dionysian elements passed down through the rites and traditions. Although much closer to something like Vulcan than a Dionysus, this Yahweh, the local craftsman metallurgy god of the southern Levant, became infused with El, the chief god of the Canaanites, to become Yahweh Elohim. This also puts him in direct opposition to Baal, the prince and son of El, in the northern Canaanite religion. For Canaanites in the broader Levantine region, El was the highest god, fathering notable gods like Baal and Yam. In Ugarit, El was married to the goddess Asherah, but no temple was dedicated solely to him. Numerous titles and attributes describe El, from being a creator and king to a wise elder. Some myths feature him prominently, such as a tale where he encounters 2 women by the sea and fathers the deities of dawn and dusk. In an Ugaritic story, El hosts a feast for the gods on Mount Lel, which may indicate he lived in a tent, explaining his lack of a dedicated temple. This text also suggests he might have resided near sources of salt water and fresh water. In the text Palace of Baal story, Baal-Hadad, commonly known as Dagon's son, is occasionally referred to as El's son, hinting at El's overarching authority over the gods. Another fragmentary text depicts El inviting gods to a banquet where he gets embarrassingly drunk, showcasing his human-like flaws. Regarding the god El, who is seen as the preeminent deity, residing atop the monumental Mount Saphon, where all gods convened, similar to Mount Olympus. Ugaritic texts referred to the collective gods as El's offspring, or all the gods, the divine assembly. El was esteemed with titles such as Creature Maker, the Monarch, the Bull El, and Humanity's Father. Even though royal attributes were primarily ascribed to El, he often came across as a figurehead, sometimes distant and inactive, resembling what experts term far-off supreme deity, something like we see in Zoroastrianism with Zorban. He lived in a celestial realm termed the sources of the 2 deeps, where he attended to visitors and dispatched directives via envoys, imagined as a kind of elderly figure. El was sometimes named El the Benevolent. Eisfeld suggests that this particular characteristic might have influenced the Israelites to envision their god Yahweh with more compassionate traits. The name El likely stems from the root Yahweh, meaning powerful or chief, and is believed to be a descriptive term, as referenced by W.F. Albright in his works. The belief system of the Canaanites, a group of Semitic peoples from the ancient Levant, spanned from the early Bronze Age up to initial centuries of the Common Era. This religion was characterized by the worship of multiple deities, and in certain instances, the exclusive veneration of one god while acknowledging the existence of others. The pantheon in Ugarit referred to the deities Elohim, or El's descendants. Philo of Byblos, in the 1st century Phoenician writer, who cited Sankonieten of Beirut, priest from the Bronze Age apparently, identified the chief creator god as Elion. He was considered the progenitor of other gods. Greek records mention his union with Beirut, symbolizing the city of Beirut. Such divine city unions can also be drawn parallel with Melkart and Tyre, Kamash and Moab, Tanit and Baal-Haman in Carthage, and Yah with Jerusalem. El Elion's relationship with Asherah can be likened to the Greek tales of Kronos and Rhea, or the myths of Saturn and Ops. At about this time, the descendants of the Dioscuri put together rafts and ships and made voyages, and, being cast ashore near Mount Cassius, consecrated a temple there, and the allies of El, who is Kronos, were surnamed Elohim, as these same were surnamed after Kronos, would have been called Croni. It was a custom of the ancients in great crisis of danger for the rulers of a city or nation, in order to avert the common ruin, to give up the most beloved of their children for sacrifice as a ransom to the avenging daemons. And those who were thus given up were sacrificed with mystic rites. Kronos then, who the Phoenicians call El, who was king of the country subsequently after his decease, was deified as the star Saturn, and had by a nymph of the country named Anabret an only begotten son, whom they call on this account Yedud, the only begotten, still so called among the Phoenicians. And when very great dangers from war had beset the country, he arrayed his son in royal apparel, prepared an altar, and sacrificed it. Kronos also, in going around the world, gives the kingdom of Attica to his own daughter Athena. But on the occurrence of a pestilence and mortality, Kronos offers his only begotten son as a whole burnt offering to his father Ouranos, and circumcises himself, compelling his allies to do the same. This has obvious parallels to the story of Abraham sacrificing his son Isaac on the altar, but then being stopped at the last minute, which is the polemic against the old ways. The story of Abraham is an obvious euhemerization of the text about El and Kronos, and archaeologists and Canaanite scholars claim that the practice of child sacrifice was rampant among Canaanites in the 1st millennium BC, as is clear from the frequent biblical allusions, as well as from the fact attested by Roman witnesses that the Carthaginians, who migrated from Phoenicia in the 9th and 8th century BC, practiced human sacrifice on a large scale, down to the fall of Carthage. The root of this practice in Punic religion is illustrated by the fact that it had not ceased by the 3rd century of the Common Era, despite repeated Roman efforts to wipe it out. The Babylonians also practiced this due to the ritual of dressing the sacrifice victim in royal purple to imitate a substitute king and slaying them in public square. Our best source occurrences are the archaeological remains from the royal death pits at early dynastic Ur from 2600 to 2500 BCE. and textual records of the substitute king ritual that was practiced at least from the early 2nd millennium BCE down to the time of Alexander the Great. These rituals were known and practiced far and wide, and El, who was also called Kronos, was at the center of these.
Again, would it not have been far better for the Carthaginians to have taken Critias or Diagoras to draw up their law code at the very beginning, and so not to believe in any divine power or God, rather than to offer such sacrifices as they used to offer to Kronos? With us, for instance, human sacrifice is not legal, but unholy, whereas the Carthaginians perform it as a thing they account holy and legal, and that too when some of them sacrifice even their own sons to Kronos, as I dare say you yourselves have heard. And from then on to the present day they perform human sacrifices with the participation of all, not only in Arcadia during the Lycaea and in Carthage to Kronos, but also periodically in remembrance of the customary usage. They spill the blood of their own kin on the altars, even though the divine law among them bars from the rites, by means of parahentera and the herald's proclamation, anyone responsible for shedding of blood in peacetime was chosen as a sacrifice for the city. For from ancient times the barbarians have had a custom of sacrificing human beings to Kronos.
In Leviticus 18:21 and Deuteronomy 12:30, the Torah contains a number of laws forbidding child sacrifice and human sacrifice in general. The Tanakh denounces human sacrifice as barbaric customs of Baal worshippers. For example, Psalm 106:37. This is another example of the biblical authors detaching themselves from the past of ancient Israel. It is impossible to reconstruct some of the details of Canaanite ritual from references in the Old Testament. 1 Kings 18 describes the contest of Elijah, the prophets of Baal, on the summit of Mount Carmel. The latter are said to have leaped about the altar, to have cut themselves after their manner with knives and lances, till the blood gushed out upon them. The gashing with knives is found in the description of El's mourning of the dead Baal, as well as in the writings of Lucian of Samosata in the 2nd century, who states that the custom was characteristic of the ceremonial mourning of Adonis, which was performed annually at the Syrian sanctuary in Hierapolis, also known as the Holy City. Moloch, sometimes written as Molech, was a Canaanite god mentioned in the biblical accounts with child sacrifice. The name combines the consonants from the Hebrew word melech, meaning king, with the vowels from bashet, meaning shame. In the Old Testament, bashet is often used as an alternative name for the widely recognized god Baal, who translates to Lord. Moloch is also depicted in the Septuagint in Amos 6 with the star god Rephaim.
But ye have borne the tabernacle of your Molech and Chion, your images, the star of your God which ye had made to yourselves.
In the Hebrew, it's Sekoth and Chion instead of Moloch and Rephaim. This text directly connects Saturn with Moloch in the following way. Sikuth is a celestial god recognized from the On God list discovered at Ugarit, originally sourced from Nippur and various Mesopotamian origins. Here, it's represented as Ninurta, who is the principal deity in Mesopotamian culture that is associated with this planet Saturn, and also acknowledged in the West, and occasionally equated with the god Horon, god worshipped by the Samaritans. The name Sikkuth in Amos precisely echoes this star god's name. Its title being Melech or king suggests the deity's prominent status becomes the god Moloch in the biblical text. This indicates that Sikkuth holds the highest significance in the ritual mentioned by Amos. Meanwhile, Kion correlates with the Akkadian term Kajmanu, denoting the steadfast, the steady one, which is a reference to the star god Horon, who is also equated with Sikkuth, is considered one of the most attested deities of the ancient sources, who shows up in text from the southernmost ends of Egypt all the way up to Turkey. He is considered a god of healing, drugs, magic, forbidden knowledge, and doom, a possible forerunner to the serpent in the garden, adding yet another layer of ancient deities that get polemicized in the biblical text. In the Hebrew scriptures, Moloch is depicted as a foreign god who occasionally found a foothold in Israel's religious practices due to the adoption of synchronistic beliefs by some of the unfaithful kings. The divine commandments given to Moses explicitly prohibited the Jews from engaging in the practices of the Egyptians or Canaanites. The edict stated, "You shall not sacrifice any of your children in fire to Moloch, thereby defiling the name of your God." Leviticus 18:21. Yet it's documented that influenced kings like Ahaz in 2 Kings 16 and Manasseh in 2 Kings 21, under Assyrian sway, paid homage to Moloch at Topheth, a hilly area just outside Jerusalem. While this site thrived under the leadership of Manasseh's son, King Amnon, it was eradicated during King Josiah's rule, who was known for his religious reforms. He is quoted, "He desecrated Topheth in the valley of Ben Hinnom, so no one could use it to sacrifice their son or daughter in the fire to Molech." 2 Kings 23:10. In Canaanite tales, two mountains, Targisi and Tharamagi, support the sky and enclose the terrestrial ocean. W.F. Albright suggests that the term El Shaddai stems from a Semitic origin found in the Akkadian words Shadu, meaning mountain, and Shadda'u, translating as mountain dweller. This associates with one of the Amuru's names. Philo of Byblos also claims that Atlas was an Elohim, just as he's a Titan in the Greek text, aligning with El Shaddai's mountain god interpretation. Harriet Lutsky offers another viewpoint, linking Shaddai with the Hebrew word Sad, meaning breast. This suggests a connection with the Semitic goddess, posits the twin mountains as symbolic breasts of the earth. Dual mountain themes are recurrent in Canaanite lore, similar to Horeb and Sinai from the Bible. The religious beliefs of the Canaanites were shaped by their geographical location, nestled between Egypt and Mesopotamia. These neighboring regions significantly impacted Canaanite spirituality. For instance, during the role of the chariot riding Marianu in Egypt's Hyksos era, Baal began to be linked with the Egyptian deity Set, especially Set's Setica form. From that point on, Baal's depictions included the crown of Lower Egypt in a distinct Egyptian posture. Likewise, deities like Atheret, later known as Asherah, and Anat started being illustrated with Egyptian wigs, reminiscent of Hathor or Isis. From another perspective, Jean Bottereau proposed that Yah of Ebla, potentially a precursor to Yam, god of the sea, was aligned with the Mesopotamian god Ea during the rule of the Akkadian Empire. The Canaanite faith in the Middle and Late Bronze Age showed evident influences from the Hurrians and Mitannites. The Hurrian goddess Hebat found devotees in Jerusalem, while Baal was often equated with the hurrying storm deity Teshub and Hittite storm god Tarhunt. When compared to the neighboring Eastern Arameans, the nature and roles of Canaanite gods seemed remarkably similar. Early Amorite invaders of Mesopotamia previously recognized deities like Baal-Hadad and El. Phoenician sailors spread Canaanite religious beliefs to the west, leaving imprints on Greek mythology. This can be seen in the division of power among the Olympian gods Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, reflecting Hittite, Canaanite, Assyrian divisions among Baal, Yam, Mot, or Marduk, and Ninurta. Additionally, Hercules' labors echo the tales of the Tyrian Melkart, who was frequently likened to Heracles. If we bring our attention back to the Elephantine Jews living in Egypt in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, we notice that Judaism at this time is still polytheistic. The majority of the Aramaic fragments show either Jove, Yahu, or Khnum as the major head of the pantheon, but some, like this Aramaic text, Carpentra Stella, says,
"Blessed is Taba, daughter of Tahapi, devotee of the god Osiris, she who to none did aught of evil, by whom no slander whatsoever was spoken. Before Osiris be thou blessed. Before him take the gift of water. Be thou his worshipper, my fair one, and among his saints be thou complete."
In the top part of the stele, the Egyptian god of the underworld, Osiris, sits on the throne, recognizable with his characteristic crook and flail. Behind him is a goddess dressed in a long skirt, could be Isis or Mot. At the table, a lady perhaps, the deceased stands with her arms raised, in adoration pose. In the lower image, the deceased is shown lying on a lion bed. The embalming god Anubis is shown, assisted by the falcon god Horus. The 4 canopic jugs with the entrails of the deceased are under the bed, with lids likely designed as heads of the 4 sons of Horus: Imsit, Hapi, Duamateth, Kebahesenuth. Nephthys kneels at the feet of the dead, and Isis is shown at the head. What happened? How is it that when we get to the time of Ptolemy II, the creation of the Septuagint, that we all of a sudden had the monotheistic approach to theology from these Israelites? I think the answer to this question is very simple. The popular philosophy of any given time period is going to dramatically affect the theology of that period. For example, we see how much the Stoics and Epicureans influenced the Middle Platonists, who in turn influenced Christian theologians and church fathers in the 2nd century. But what about the 3rd century BCE? At the time when the Pentateuch was being put together, Platonism was on the rise, along with Aristotle's school of the Peripatetic and the skepticism of Pyrrho. These philosophers, with the resources of the great library of Alexandria, with access to thinkers like Zoroaster, the Magian, Heraclitus, some of the earliest thinkers to exhibit monotheistic or skeptic tendencies against the dogmas and superstitions of the day.
Initiation here into the ancient mysteries, so honored among men, mocks holiness. They raise their voices at stone idols, as a man might argue with his doorpost. They have understood so little of the gods.
Thales was the first master in the school of Athens. He was known for traveling to see the greatest minds of his day in Egypt and Babylon. He taught that water was the first principle, arche, in which life can spring from. Thales believed in an uncreated being who crafts physis, nature, which all things are from. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Notice how water is the first thing that is formed. This is in line with the philosophical thinking of Thales in the school of Athens. It is also possible the Egyptian sages or magi like Zoroaster believed in something similar. Herodotus describes Thales as a Phoenician by remote descent. When Thales died, Anaximander became the second master, who is said to be the teacher of Pythagoras, who brought these teachings to Italy. Anaximander is the earliest use of the word apeiron, or infinite, limitless, to designate the original first principle of the cosmos, uncreated, beginning of all things. The first philosopher to employ in philosophical context the term arche, which until then had meant beginning or origin. Anaximander called this something by the name physis, or nature. Next after him was Anaximenes, third master of the school of Athens, from the Milesian school, who was a material monist who sought to discover the arche, the beginning or origin, the one underlying basis of all things. Anaximenes also believed that air was divine. He identified air with the breath of life, and thus the soul as well as the air in the atmosphere. Only a single sentence-long quote by Anaximenes survives. Just as our soul, being air, holds us together, so pneuma and air encompass and guard the whole world. This is the first extant source to use the word pneuma, or breath. Genesis 2:7 says, "The Lord God formed man from dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, the pneuma, and the man became a living being." Genesis lines up perfectly with the philosophy of the pre-Socratics. After Anaximenes, you get Heraclitus, who claims to announce an everlasting logos, or word, according to which all things are one, in some sense. Opposites are necessary for life, but they are unified in a system of balanced exchanges. The world itself consists of a law-like interchange of elements symbolized by fire. And Anaximenes is criticized by Parmenides, who starts the school of the Eleatics. He is called the father of logic. It is during this time that superstitions and dogmas are being challenged. Anaxagoras would be the next master of Athens. His innovative theory of physical nature is encapsulated in the phrase, "a portion of everything in everything." Its primary expression is found in the following difficult fragment. "And since the portions of both the large and the small are equal in amount, in this way too all things will be in everything, nor can they be separate, but all things have a portion of everything. Since there cannot be a smallest, nothing can be separated or come to be by itself. But as in the beginning now, too, all things are together. But in all things there are many things, equal in amount, both in the larger and the smaller, of things being separated off." God is one is also a phrase that is attributed to him, who, in response to the challenges imposed by the competing schools of Parmenides and Empedocles, is able to unify the leading theories of the day. Anaxagoras introduced the concept of the nous, or the cosmic mind, as an ordering force. And one of his students would be Archelaus, the next master of the school, who was also at this time a staunch skeptic and natural philosopher. He's the one who teaches Socrates, and Socrates is the teacher of Plato. Plato would be the one to unify the entire base of knowledge that Athens had been accumulating from the world for the past 200 years, and bring them into his dialogues through the character of Socrates, who was his teacher. Plato wrote a dialogue called Timaeus, an exposition of cosmology, in which the demiurge, the agent who takes the pre-existing materials of chaos, arranges them according to the models of eternal forms, produces all physical things of the world, including human bodies. The demiurge, or the craftsman, if you want to say that, is sometimes thought of as the Platonic personification of active reason. What is so striking about this is that the demiurge is the craftsman of the universe, like Yahweh or Ptah or El in the Ugaritic text. He is the uncreated creator of the gods and humans alike. Plato's idea of the cosmos is identical to what is taught in Judeo-Christian cosmology in the time when the Pentateuch is put together. Plato, like his predecessors, were challenging the dogmas and superstitions of his day, and he even sought to replace Homer and Hesiod, the two most famous poets of ancient Greece, where most religious ideas of the day are found in the stories about their gods. For instance, take Plato in Republic Book 3, through the mouth of Socrates, says, "There was another motive in purifying religion, which is to banish fear. For no man can be courageous who is afraid of death, or who believes the tales which are repeated by the poets concerning the world below. They must be gently requested not to abuse hell or Hades. They may be reminded that their stories are both untrue and discouraging. Nor must they be angry if we expunge obnoxious passages, such as the depressing words of Achilles. I would rather be serving man than rule over the dead. And the verses which tell of the squalid mansions, the senseless shadows, the fitting soul mourning over lost strength and youth, the soul with the gibber going beneath the earth like smoke, or the souls of the suitors which flutter about like bats, the terrors and horrors of Cocytus and Styx, ghosts and shapeless shades, and the rest of their Tartarian nomenclature must vanish. Such tales may have their use, but they are not the proper food for soldiers. As little can we admit the sorrows and sympathies of the Homeric heroes, Achilles the son of Thetis, in tears, throwing ashes on his head, or pacing up and down the seashore in distraction. Or Priam, the cousin of the gods, crying aloud, rolling in the mire. A good man is not prostrated at the loss of children or fortune, neither is death terrible to him, and therefore lamentations over the dead should not be practiced by men of note. They should be the concern of inferior persons only, whether women or men. Still worse is the attribution of such weakness to the gods, as when the goddess say, alas, may travail, and the worst of all, when the king of heaven himself laments in the inability to save Hector, or sorrows over the impending doom of his dear Sarpedon. Such a character of God is not ridiculed by our young men, is likely to be imitated by them. Nor should our citizens be given the excess laughter. Such violent delights are followed by violent reaction. The description in the Iliad of the gods shaking their sides at their clumsiness of Hephaestus will not be admitted by us. Certainly not. Plato is clearly not satisfied with the pagan religions of his day and wants to replace it with a more up-to-date or mature theology, with a perfect God who has no mistakes and is never depicted doing anything that can be looked at as weak. Plato says, let us declare then for what cause nature, and this all was framed by him that framed it. He was good, and in none that is good can there arise jealousy of aught at any time. So being far aloof from this, he desired that all things should be as like unto himself as possible. This is that the most sovereign cause of nature and the universe, which we shall most surely be right in accepting from men of understanding, For God desiring that all things should be good, and that so far as this might be, there should be not evil, having received all that is visible, not in a state of rest, but moving without harmony or measure, brought it from its disorder into order, thinking that this was all in ways better than the other. And Plato continues, in the forming the universe, he created reason and soul and body, that he might be the maker of a work that was by nature most fair and perfect. In this way, then, we ought to affirm, according to probable account, that this universe is a living creature, and very truth possessing soul and reason by the providence of God. Plato also rejected Athenian democracy in favor of a republic guided by a priesthood and a philosopher king, whose laws were given by the gods and are the most ancient and holy. He rejected even things he once said were great before, such as the Dionysian mysteries of love and passion, which he now argues in his last work are empty pleasures. For instance, in his last work, On Laws, 636b, these common meals, for example, and these gymnasia, while they are at present beneficial to the states in many other respects, yet in the event of civil strife, they prove dangerous. And, moreover, this institution, when of old standing, is thought to have corrupted the pleasures of love, which are natural not to men, but also natural to beasts. For this, your states are held primarily responsible, and along with them all others that are especially encourage the use of the gymnasia. And whether one makes the observation in earnest or in jest, one certainly should not fail to observe that when male unites with female for the procreation, the pleasure experience is held to be due to nature, but contrary to nature, when male mates with male, or female with female, that those first guilty of such enormities were impelled by their slavery to pleasure. And we all accuse the Cretans of concocting the story about Ganymede to justify unnatural pleasures. In case you didn't know, Ganymede was the boy lover of Zeus. When we look at this, in context to the story of Maccabees, you see the laws enacted and followed by none other than the Maccabee dynasty, who revolts against the Greek pagan king Antiochus IV for putting a gymnasium in Jerusalem, which they called an abomination. It looks like Judas Maccabees and Plato believe the same thing about gymnasiums. I also think there is clear ties to ancient Babylon, Assyrian, and Sumerian laws and stories woven in the text. These are in no doubt in my mind authentic and ancient Near Eastern texts that the Greeks inherit from the Jews. For example, Deuteronomy, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, is clearly an ancient law that we see present in Hammurabi's code. As Plato said in the Republic, though, for people to respect the laws, they need to be the most ancient and given by the gods from the oldest times. But I also think there is no reason to believe that the philosophers and scribes of Alexandria, like Demetrius Phalereum, did not have any oversight over what was written and edited. What solid evidence do we have that Platonism has any influence on Judaism? If we continue down our line of masters, schools of Athens, as I trace the roots of Thales down to Plato, the next three school of master after Plato is Aristotle, who, after the conquest of Alexander the Great, is sent into exile by the Eleusinian priest, who charge Aristotle with blasphemy against the gods. And Aristotle is replaced by Theophrastus, who was also charged by the Athenian religious leaders with blasphemy against the gods. Now keep in mind, all of this is happening after Socrates. And what is happening with these masters of Athens being at odds with religious leaders, priests, Eleusinians? They're obviously challenging the dogmas, superstitions. Now Theophrastus was the student and new master of the school who taught Demetrius Phalerum. Demetrius of Phalerum was also exiled, and he moves to Alexandria with Pyrrho the Skeptic. After traveling the world with Alexander the Great, meeting Brahmins and Magi, and living amongst the Chaldeans in Babylon, and they went down to the court of Ptolemy in Alexandria to help build the library. According to multiple sources, Demetrius Phalerum was trying to collect all the books in the inhabitable world and was commissioned by Ptolemy to translate the laws of the Jews into Greek. In my personal opinion, it is at this time when the Pentateuch is put together in its current monotheistic form, with influences from the Platonists of the time period. You see, we have a direct line from Thales, the pre-Socratics, all the way down to Plato, and then continuing down to Demetrius, who moves to Alexandria, Egypt, and creates the Pentateuch. Here's what Josephus says about this. When Alexander had reigned 12 years, and after him Ptolemy Soter 40 years, Philadelphus then took the kingdom of Egypt and held it 40 years within one. He procured the law to be interpreted and set free those who had come from Jerusalem into Egypt and were in slavery there, who were 120,000. The occasion was this. Demetrius Phalerum, who was library keeper to the king, was now endeavoring, if it were possible, to gather together all the books that were in the habitable earth, and buying whatsoever was anywhere valuable, were agreeable to the king's inclination, which inclination of his Demetrius was zealously subservient. And when once Ptolemy asked him how many tens of thousands of books he had collected, he replied that he already had 20 times 10,000, but that in a little time he should have 50 times 10,000. But be said, he had been informed that there were many books of the laws among the Jews worthy of inquiring for, and worthy of the king's library, but which, being written of characters and in dialect of their own, will cause no small pains in getting them translated into the Greek tongue. That the character in which they are written seems to be like that which is proper to the character of the Syrians, and that its sound when pronounced is like theirs also, and that this sound appears to be peculiar to themselves. Wherefore he said that nothing hindered why they might not get those books to be translated also. For while nothing is wanting that is necessary for that purpose, we may have their books also in this library. So the king thought that Demetrius was very zealous to procure him an abundance of books, and that he suggested that this was exceeding proper for him to do, and therefore he wrote to the Jewish high priest that he should act accordingly. Demetrius wrote in the letter, "It is not fit for us, O king, to overlook things hastily or to deceive ourselves, but to lay the truth open. For since we have determined not only to get the laws of the Jews transcribed, but interpreted also, for thy satisfaction, by what means can we do this, while so many of the Jews are now slaves in thy kingdom? For both these people and we also worship the same God, the framer of all things. We call him, and that truly, by the Greek Xena, or Jupiter, because he breathes life into all men. Wherefore do thou restore these men to their own country, and that this do the honor of God, because these men pay a peculiar excellent worship to him." Notice how Demetrius is already comparing his framer of all things, the divine craftsman or demiurge, who he was most likely comparing to Yahweh in order to unify this God with Jupiter. Keep in mind, less than a century before this, the fragments of the Jewish communities that we have are still polytheistic. We have a direct line from the masters of the Athens Academy, from Thales all the way down to Demetrius, who was writing this letter to the Jews, who was the face of the creation of the Pentateuch. I think there is more than enough evidence to lay this argument out that this is the beginning of the trend of monotheism, and at this time, the priesthoods of Yahweh and El, synced with that of the craftsmen and demiurgic creator gods of Egypt and Greece. Yahweh of the Elohim and the God who has its roots all over Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean world, such as Kronos, El, Ptah, Yahweh or Zeus or Amun-Ra, these so-called pagans that lived after this time period also adopt the same monist trends the Judeo-Christians adopt. The Sol Invictus religion would come from that, and the Neoplatonist philosophers and theurgists were no exception to this. The Chaldean oracles also show a one who is above all gods. The philosophy of the time, Platonism to Middle Platonism, and eventually Neoplatonism, would continue to influence the theology of whatever time matched it. I'll leave you with this. In a text from Plutarch called Moralia, he says, "Moreover, most people believe that Amun is the name given to Zeus in the land of the Egyptians, a name which we, with a slight alteration, pronounce Amun. But Manetho Saventus thinks that the meaning concealed or concealment lies in this word. Hecataeus of Abdera says that the Egyptians used the expression one to another whenever they called to anyone, for the word is a form of address. When they therefore address the supreme God, whom they believe to be the same as the universe, as if he were invisible, concealed, and implore him to make visible himself and manifest to them, they use the word Amen. So great then was the circumspection of the Egyptians in their wisdom, touching all that had to do with the gods. Plutarch is proposing that the term Amen is a shout or chant that is used to call on any of the gods. Not just Amun, but any of the gods, including the supreme invisible one. He also cites Hecataeus of Abdera for this very idea. And it turns out that Hecataeus of Abdera is the oldest fragment that we have, citation of Moses, outside of the Hebrew Bible. Let me know what you guys think about this stuff. Leave it in the comments. Make sure you like and subscribe. You have just attained true gnosis.
And so we have to know how to look at ancestral consciousness and intelligence and pour the highest level and say, we've already done good enough. Yes, society today is the most insecure it has ever been in eternity. So the things that we're doing are not from a place of healthy habits. They're from a place of trauma, insecurity, and fear and perversion. So you're not doing the healthy, highest level version of it. I appreciate my pops teaching me how to be a guy. From a boy to a man, and ultimately back to the natural state of being to a God. Me as God supposed to always move with that higher self. But I have to be able to execute it. Having knowledge is not power. The execution of knowledge is power. Knowledge makes a man unfit to be slave. Because the only real knowledge you can get is knowledge itself. This is the highest level. The highest level is ownership. The highest level is power. The highest level is sovereignty. The highest level is higher consciousness. The highest level is when we own our own culture. Excellence at a very high level. Not eye level. A high like that. It's time for a high level conversation. Another high level conversation. High level conversation. Tap in with the guy. Peace Family is 19 Keys with another episode of High Level Conversation. Today on High Level Conversations, as all days, we have very powerful, special people. This brother in particular, you probably have actually been affected
by his work and his wisdom and his pilgrimage that he has been set on throughout his life. He is known as the father of the Ark. He first initiated Kemetic priest in New York. He has made his life in duty to his beliefs, in duty to our ancestors. And in the rhythm of that, he's actually built institutions and foundations, bringing the ancient symbols to modern man. Most people walk around with the symbols of the Ark. They don't actually know the history of bringing their symbols to America and how it become more established. The good brother that is on today, I believe, is one of the ancestors who represent that tree of life, right? This tree of wisdom and this tree of knowledge that must be documented. There's a lot of TikTok knowledge and script scholars who can read some information and then spew it for a minute and sound intelligent, but it's completely different when you actually dive into it. It's different when you can defend it. It's different when you actually know it. And that is taking you through the phases of initiation. This is a man who has not only been in the police force, but had to leave that force because they didn't believe in the forces that he believed in. He went from carrying a gun to carrying an op. And these are two different levels of peace. You know, one is the weapon of the West, you understand me? And the other is the weapon of peace. And so now this brother today that I have, the special master that he is going to enlighten us on some of the ancient Kemetic practices. That's right, I didn't say ancient Egypt, I said ancient Kemetic practices. Enlighten us, what do the symbols actually mean? What do the metanetra, what we know as the hieroglyphs, actually mean? And so today I am honored to be here with this brother because this is where I get all my jewelry from. So he keeps me dripped up, right? I'm here in New York in his studio where he has what he calls the joyery, right? The joy to bring joy. So I want to thank the good brother Baba Haru for being here today, and we're going to learn some very powerful, key, and valuable lessons. My good brother, how we feeling today?
Anashar Nebet Nebercher Kemam Nebu Neteru. I say praises to the divine, who is the Lady Lord of the ultimate limits. And I give thanks to be here to greet my beloved brothers and sisters out there in Netherland. Yes, indeed. The fine line. Yes, sir.
So today I want to jump right into it, man. Every time I get here, I'm excited. The energy in the shop is always high vibrational, right? And every time I come here, you give me some Kemetic wisdom, right? But I want to really dive into what is Kemetic wisdom? What is Kemetic teaching? What is Kemetic principles?
Okay. The most important aspect of the Kemetic reclamation and resurrection is our claim to the spiritual culture of Mayat. Mayat meaning justice, balance, order, truth, reciprocity, sobriety, propriety, harmony. All of those principles that I just spoke about in English represents that ancient spiritual high culture of the Nile Valley Africans. And I need to say, before I go any further, though Kemet is the original name for the land now miscalled Egypt, the fact is that it's the northeastern section of a double queen kingdom known as Smai Parwi. Smai Parwi means unity of the two regions. The Egyptologists like to say the two lands, but it's more than the two lands. That's a geographical designation. It refers also, Smai Tawi refers also to spirit and matter. Smai Tawi represents the upper and lower, your right and left brain hemispheres, which many of us have been trained to stay out of the right brain because that's usually operated on the left side of the body. And they consider, the Western man considered the left side to be the sinister side. And which is unfortunate because that's the divine feminine within all of us.
Right.
You see, we are all what you would call of these two regions. You know, both intellect and intuition. And the intuition resides, the Divine Mother throne is on the right side of our brain, and the Divine Father is on the left side. So he governs intellect and she governs intuition. We have also the marriage of the sun and the moon, again, which is very prominent in Islam, and the star and the crescent.
Correct.
You see, so I am always into the cosmic designation of things. So that's what I love about our different our divine culture.
Yeah, when you really get into study, you find correlations in between all religions in the world and all spiritual groups, right?
Mhm.
And there's a saying Honorable Elijah Muhammad says, settle on the best part, right? And people ask me a lot, like, or you always ask me as well, how is it that you have interest in all of these other areas, being that you're a Muslim? And I believe that one's belief system or way of life is not a limiting thing, right? If anything, it should be a guidance to understanding all of the world, right? And so for me, living a way of life or studying a practice of a way of life, getting master teachers from a master teacher gives you a third eye, gives you a view lens where now you have a North Star, you have a compass to where you can go in. And what I see in this generation a lot of times is we pick up the diverse interpretations of everything in the world, right? Some people want to be a Buddhist, you want to be a spiritual person, you want to be Kemetic, you want to be Muslim, you want to be everything, right? Without mastering anything, right? And so it's like a person with 1,000 destinations. They don't know where to actually go, right? So you need to know where you are to know where you're going, right? You need to know where you came from, right? And so for me, it's about giving direction, right? A generation that I feel is lost in trying to find itself in every text, in every tweet, in every TikTok, in every Instagram or YouTube. No, we have to first build foundation, right? And from that foundation of principles and true understanding, then that can give you guidance, right?
Okay.
Now, the history of the Ankh, right? We see the Ankh everywhere. Like Lord London, she had it in the movie You People, right? We see everybody's wearing Ankhs of all different, lifestyles, ways of life. But most people couldn't tell you what the Ankh actually means.
That's true.
So, from the Baba of the Ankh, can we get your history? First of all, how did you begin to take on the Ankh and bring it into North America? Right? What's your history and connection to it?
Oh boy, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Well, to begin with, my beloved father, James Wilkins Yorhes, or Georges, as known in English, he was the one who said to me, he was a Christian minister with the Apostolic Faith Church, and of course I spent most of my childhood in the church, 3 days a week. But my father would say to me, when I would go to his tailor shop after school, to do the buttonholes and the overcasting of the inseams of trousers, he would say, son, I'm in this house of my brother Shem, but I'm really from the house of Ham. That's how he was taught in the Bible. And he said, we need to study, because if the Bible says honor your mother and your father, that your days may be long on the earth, I need to study Ham. He said, you look like that little boy they called King Tut. My father, he was a teenager when they found the resting place of Aten Ra, Tutank. That's the way his name was actually spelled. As a matter of fact, that's the way he was born, with Aten Ra, which means the sun, Tut, the image of Ankh, the image of life itself. That's what his name represents. Later, of course, he changed his name to Amen Tutank to honor the hidden aspect of the spirit. So we have Aten Ra, which is the revealed light of the present day sun, and then we have the Amen, which is the hidden aspect. Ra itself is the hidden sun, the sun behind our sun that we see in the sky every day. So as I began to study more, and he told me specifically to study about this little boy who was crowned king at the age of 9, and of course expired around the age of 18 or 19. They said
19.
Yes, they said he may have fallen off a chariot or some palace intrigue that he may have been murdered. But he said I should study as much as I can about him, and it would lead me to discover the beauty of this ancient culture. And he was very insistent about that because he had joined the Marcus Garvey movement in San Pedro de Macorís in the Caribbean island of Dominican Republic. And he said to me that I should study as much as I can, and that's what I had done. And it stayed with me as I grew up. And finally, I met a man while pounding the beat in East New York. I used to stop into the store, Juan Vega's store, jewelry store, and I said, tell Juan how I want to learn how to trabajo en la plata, how to work silver. He said, oh, you come here one Saturday and I will introduce you to the man. And I walked in one day and there this gentleman walked in. He was about 52 years old, Anacleto Santiago de Colon, and he introduced himself. He said, Jimmy, you want to learn the joyeria? I said, yes. He said, well, I have a house in Williamsburg. You come down there and I will teach you whatever you want to know. He used to work in the jewelry center of 47th Street here in New York, where you have the largest jewelry district. And but he had a full shop in his basement, and I would go there. And for 1 year, I was his apprentice. But he would not let me do anything. He said, just watch me, take notes. It wasn't until he had quit his job and one Friday, and he was going to come in that Monday because we had found a space. And he said, oh, by the way, he said, you want to be my partner? I said, you think I'm qualified enough? He says, I think so, and I will show you even more. So we found a place over in the Bowery, and we started. That weekend, on that Sunday, he left his job that Friday, and that Monday he was going to come in full time. And he said to me, he said, we're going to do very well. He said, because I see you have good hands, because he brought me the tools by which I could sculpt in miniature. And so I said, fine. And that Sunday, I got a call from his beloved queen, his beloved wife. Anacleto se murió, that he had died. He had a heart condition. And he kept telling me, he said, I don't have time for you to do anything. Just listen and watch everything I do. And it wasn't until I came back from the interment, his funeral, that I casted my very first piece. I was sculpting a lion's buckle. And when I put it in the oven after the wax melted away, because we were using the lost wax process, which you can Google that, what the lost wax process is. That's how a lot of the jewelry is made today. And it was amazing how when I saw the ears of the lion coming out of the investment, I said, oh my God, I can do this. And I dropped to my knees and I thanked his spirit for giving me these tools by which I could use to help to awaken my people. Because I realized that in addition to knowing about the history, I had to produce something from the inspiration of this history. And because of the fact that I noticed that people were wearing different emblems, and my family would say, you have to give the people what they want. I said, well, I think I'm going to give them what they need. If it kills me, if I go broke, so be it. But I'm going to give them what they need. They need emblems of our culture, because we need to walk around and be teachers. Each one teach one, as Alma John would say. She was the first registered nurse in Harlem Hospital, and she received an Ankh, by the way. And so it was my duty to bring this key forth, because I noticed on the temple walls that our ancestors were always carrying this key, holding it by the feminine principle here. All the kings, the queens, and all the nobles were carrying the Ankh. And so I said, well, I think it's time we started carrying it again. And so, of course, at the time I was a police officer, and I was, I don't like to say police officer because that brings up memory of the slave catchers.
Yeah.
I prefer to see myself as a peace officer.
Yeah.
Because that's what I did. I brought the peace to the beat, and I love to walk the beat, to talk to the people. And I got some pushback for that because I spent too much time talking to the people.
Right.
I said, well, if you're going to...
And you was wearing your Ankh?
on over my handcuff case.
So you was wearing your ankh, and did they didn't like that, or did they care?
No, I was psychologically tested.
How so?
Well, because I kept on wearing it because they said it was not part of the uniform.
Right.
And I said, well, so they had me go down to for a psychological test. And when I walked in, I threw the ankh on top of the table. I think it chipped the surgeon's table. And he says, what's that? I said, oh, that's why I'm here, because I carry this. He said, can I touch it? He picked it up from the table. I said, of course, go ahead. He said, you did this? I said, yes, sir. Oh, that explains it. You're an artist, and everybody knows artists are different. He says, get out of here. He says, now I have to have whoever sent you down here to be brought down here to be tested, because they should know that as an artist you are going to express yourself in a free way. And that's how I was able to then carry it. Of course, I did not make a big deal of quote, disobeying the command of my superior officers. But the fact is that I still carried this on because I felt a balance, life, and I got the instrument of death, which I never used in all the 20 years I was on there. I don't like guns at all, but I know that that's how some people are rolling these days. So I prefer to carry this key.
And that's powerful of the story. First of all, just in the sense that when we see the symbols out today, the knowledge that's out here today, like, you know, the information, there's a backstory to how it got here. And there was somebody who had to push and persevere, right, in order to deliver this information, right? Like, you know, I'm well aware of the ability now to wear the crown, but there's a, you know, long history before 19 keys, right? Like, so people outwardly wear the ankh and there's no pushback, there's no issue now. But when it was people like yourself in the 60s, when you was wearing the ankh, that symbol had not been known and it was foreign to the mind, right? And, you know, anything that was, you know, not traditional, you know, Catholicism or Christianity, right, was always opposed. And so I find that interesting because a lot of people don't know to recognize our elders for the privileges that we have today, which some people, you know, may take for granted because you don't think about like, damn, I get to wear my symbol, but, you know, who wore it first, right? What did they go through to where I can now be comfortable and it's normalized, right? And so as we talk about this key, you know, what does the ankh mean?
Well, to make it quite short, it's just a word in the Metuneter, now known as hieroglyphics. It's a word for life because it honors first the divine feminine principle. It honors the divine children, the divine father. You see, in our culture, Nut, heaven, is feminine. Geb, earth, is masculine, and the children, holy daughter or son, is the product of that comes out of the womb through the seed of the father. Now there's many different interpretations because as many of our people confront this divine key, their ancestral memory kicks in. So they have different definitions of what
ancestral memory.
Yes, hereditary memory. It's
by your, I know my understanding of it, but by your definition of, you know, just the term ancestral memory with people, like, because symbols are very powerful. I just talked about this, you know, episode with Joey Badass because he has some symbols and, you know, I wear my symbols. But like I said, symbols create